Washington, California, Idaho, Alaska, and Washington, D.C.
Good evening. Leading the news this Veterans Day, Secretary of State Baker issued a warning about North Korea's nuclear weapons potential, and President Bush paid special tribute to Gulf War veterans. We'll have details in our news summary in a moment. Jim?
After the news summary, we have a report and a debate about making family and medical leave a law of the land. Then come an update on the new problems for Russian President Boris Yeltsin, a Kwame Holman report on profit sharing in national parks, and an essay on the art of Chuck Close.
Funding for the NewsHour has been provided by PepsiCo. Every day we enjoy people being cold to us, cutting us up, getting fresh with us, tearing into us, and calling us chicken. In fact, the more people do it, the happier we are. PepsiCo. And by AT&T. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the financial support of viewers like you.
Secretary of State Baker today called on the world's major powers to work together to prevent a nuclear arms race on the Korean Peninsula. During a trip to Tokyo, Baker said the U.S. would talk to Japan, China, and the Soviet Union about using their influence to reduce tensions between North and South Korea. He said North Korea's nuclear weapons potential was now the #1 threat to security in Northeast Asia. Baker met in Tokyo with new Japanese Prime Minister Kiichi Miyazawa. They discussed trade and other issues. Baker also urged Japan to move beyond what he called checkbook diplomacy and step forward as a leader in confronting global issues. U.S. diplomats returned to Cambodia today after a 16-year absence. They went to help maintain a ceasefire in the country's civil war and to arrange democratic elections. Those elections will be held under a United Nations peace plan signed by Cambodia's warring factions last month. The U.S. broke ties with Cambodia in 1975 when Khmer Rouge rebels overthrew the American-backed government. Jim?
Russian President Boris Yeltsin suffered a major political setback today. His parliament rejected a state of emergency he had declared in a breakaway Muslim enclave. The parliament voted instead to seek a political solution to the crisis. In the enclave, Chechen-Ingush supporters of its independence movement held a rally to celebrate the Russian retreat. Armed militants patrolled roads to keep Russian soldiers out. Chechen-Ingush declared independence from Russia November 2nd. There was more fierce fighting in the Yugoslav Republic of Croatia today. It happened despite the economic sanctions imposed on Yugoslavia by the European community and the United States. We have a report narrated by Richard Vaughn of Worldwide Television News.
The medieval city of Dubrovnik under fire again. High above the city, federal troops continued to hammer away at Croatian defenses. Under the relentless attack, surrender may be only days away. The situation was just as grim in other Croatian-held areas. To the east of the capital, Zagreb, lies Novska, a town set ablaze when federal troops tried to oust Croat forces. The army has scored a series of direct hits recently, a further escalation of the tattered nation's civil war. In Vukovar, street-by-street clashes continued. The ravaged Danube River town has become a symbol of Croatia's resistance, but now seems poised to fall to the Serbian forces. Since the fighting started 4.5 months ago, 10 ceasefires have been written and torn up. And with federal troops strengthening their positions, there appears no end in sight.
Israeli soldiers killed 4 Arab guerrillas today. Police said they crossed over the border from Egypt equipped for a major attack. It was the first clash along Israel's western border in nearly a year.
The European scientists who performed a successful experiment with nuclear fusion over the weekend said today they would seek $5 billion to build a fusion reactor. The project director said the money was needed to accelerate the commercial development of fusion energy, which is now expected to take at least 50 years. In Saturday's experiment in England, fusion was achieved for 2 seconds. It produced 1.7 megawatts of power. Nuclear fusion is a safe and unlimited energy source, similar to the method by which the sun creates heat. Its main fuel can be extracted from water, and it produces no waste. The head of the AIDS program at the World Health Organization said today that the case of basketball star Magic Johnson would cause people in the United States and Europe to realize that heterosexuals are at risk for AIDS. Dr. Michael Mershon said in Geneva that 75% of all people infected with the virus worldwide got it through heterosexual contact. In the United States, the percentage is smaller. It's reported that 100,000 of the 1 million Americans with the AIDS virus were infected through heterosexual sex.
U.S. war veterans were honored around the country today. President Bush went to the Veterans Day ceremonies at Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia. He laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier at 11 a.m. to mark the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918, when World War I came to an end. Later, he said the nation owed a special debt to veterans of the most recent Gulf War.
They went proudly, willingly, on a mission of high principle and noble purpose, to defeat aggression and defend freedom. They freed a captive nation and set America free by renewing our faith in ourselves. And in this victory, America rallied behind those who served in Desert Storm, and in a wonderful way, they rallied behind those who so proudly served in Vietnam. It was long overdue, and it was good for the nation's soul.
A new study released today said the nation's 172 veterans hospitals need major reforms. The study was done for the Department of Veterans Affairs. It identified such problems as waiting lists, malfunctioning equipment, and low employee morale. It said contracting work to private hospitals and reducing the number of acute care beds would solve some of the problems. And that's it for the news summary tonight. Now it's on to the family leave debate, an update from Russia, money making at national parks, and an Am I Wallach essay.
Our lead story tonight is the long political battle to create a family leave policy. For the past 6 years, congressional advocates have tried to guarantee many employees the right to unpaid leave for a newborn baby or a child, parent, or spouse with a serious illness. This year, despite the president's opposition, there's a chance it will become law. A vote is coming soon in the House of Representatives. In a moment, we'll debate the issue, but first this backgrounder from correspondent Tom Bearden.
Well, we're about there, Dixie.
On a recent fall day, when most people her age would be going off to high school, Dixie Yandel's parents drove her 30 miles to Atlanta. The destination? A children's cancer clinic. 15-year-old Dixie has cancer. Her doctors wanted to check her blood count to see if painful chemotherapy was working. George Yandel tried to ease the tension by teasing his daughter.
What do you think your counts are going to be today? I'm going to guess 30 even. You think they're going to be higher?
I think they're going to be 38-40.
You're positive, ain't you?
The Yandels are absolutely determined to be with their daughter to support her during these difficult times. But George Yandel believes that determination cost him his job. Dixie has synovial sarcoma, a soft tissue cancer. It required urgent treatment, a leg amputation, chemotherapy, and a lot of family attention. For 5 years, George Yandel had been a top salesman at Mitchell Motors, a local car dealership. To help his daughter, he cut his work hours dramatically, from 60 hours a week to 30, some weeks only 20. 5 months after the cancer diagnosis, Yandel was fired.
They called me in that day and said, George, I got something to tell you that I don't know how to tell you, but I've got to let you go. I thought the man was kidding me. I said, oh, what'd I do, forget to sign a paper or something? And then I could tell by his refusal to grin, I could see he was serious. And he said, no, I'm serious. He says, and I think you know why. And I said, well, is it because of Dixie? And he said, yeah, he said, it is.
Yandel sued Mitchell Motors. They declined to talk to us about the case. But in court documents, company managers said they fired Yandel for lack of sales effort. Sales manager said Yandel's working only part-time had dramatically lowered his sales volume. They said they were forced to make a business decision that was best for the company, and that meant replacing Yandel.
Dixie, your turn.
The company said they sympathized with the family, but they did not think Yandel needed to take as much time off as he did. They added they believed Mrs. Yandel, who was not working, should have taken more care of matters on her own. But Yandel felt it was too much for his wife to handle alone, and he wanted to be with his daughter too.
It's 39. You owe me $5.
Okay.
What are they?
39.
John Ashby. I gotta go report his. 39. She said 38.
Look at those white blood counts.
Oh my God. She's gonna probably need blood.
Yandel says his story shows why the federal government should require employers to guarantee jobs for working families during medical crises like illness and pregnancy. But some business people disagree. Betty Somalian is vice chairman of the Business Council of Georgia. She says emergency leave legislation would hurt Georgia businesses. And she says Yandel's case is unusual.
You can always find some exception. You can always find some situation that's going to make your case. But the vast, vast majority of people, of employers in this country, and especially small business, are very compassionate people. They care about their employees. And when you have situations where you have all these set rules that just apply in certain cases, that's not going to solve the problem.
Supporters of the Family Medical Leave Bill now before Congress have used the Yandels as a case study during congressional hearings. George Yandel testified in favor of the bill, which would guarantee employees of large companies a return to their previous income after up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave. Yandel said if that had been available to him, he could have reorganized his life, returned to work, and proved his value to his employer.
I didn't have an opportunity to prove to them that there was a light at the end of the tunnel, that I was in a situation where I was regrouping. You just need time to do that. You just need a little time to get your life back together and get your ducks back in a row and get back on a normal lifestyle situation, as normal as you can get.
9 months after he lost his job, Yandel found work at a smaller dealership, although making 2/3 less. But he couldn't get health insurance because of Dixie's pre-existing cancer condition. She's now on Medicaid. Mitchell Motors claimed they too suffered from lost sales during the 5 months they kept George Yandel employed.
A measure to guarantee unpaid leave passed the Senate last month. Judy Woodruff looks at what happens next. Judy?
The fate of family leave now rests in the House of Representatives, which may vote this week. The vote there will be on a provision like the Senate, which applies to businesses with 50 or more workers. It guarantees up to 12 weeks unpaid leave for the birth or adoption of a child and for the serious illness of a child, spouse, or parent. Employers must pay for health insurance during the leave. Now, for 4 different perspectives, Representative Marge Rockema, Republican of New Jersey, is one of the chief sponsors of the House legislation. Republican John Boehner of Ohio opposes it. He is a member of the House Education and Labor Committee where the bill originated. Ellen Galinsky is co-president of the Families and Work Institute, a nonprofit research group in New York. She authored a study about the impact of family leave laws in 4 states. And Mary Tavener is Senior Director of Government Relations at the National Association of Wholesaler Distributors, a Washington trade group. She is also a founding member of the Concerned Alliance of Responsible Employers, a coalition of 170 business and other groups that oppose the legislation. She joins us from a studio on Capitol Hill. Congressman Boehner, I'd like to begin with you. When you see a family situation like the one we just saw, the Yandel family in Georgia, isn't it difficult for you to oppose legislation that would bring them relief?
Well, it is difficult because family and medical leave today is an important issue in our society. And I think employers, the vast number of employers, are dealing with their employees because it's to their benefit to keep a well-trained, happy workforce. The issue in front of us is whether the federal government should mandate a one-size-fits-all approach for every employer in America that has 50 or more employees. I think that is wrong.
How do you respond to that, Congressman Rockema?
Well, of course, I have said for a long time that this is a minimum labor standard that we must put into effect in this country. It's not a radical idea. It's an idea that we have always adopted when labor standards change, when conditions in the workforce change, as they are today. The majority of women are in the workforce out of economic necessity, I might add. They're trying to hold families together. And those women have, and men too, have extraordinary problems when either they have a baby, the birth of a child, or they have a medical crisis come upon them. The devastation that we saw in that family in Georgia. And I know something about this. I've had the experience in my own family, although I did not have to rely upon an outside job. But when medical devastation strikes a family, I don't think Congress wants to be saying, go find another job. That's unacceptable. Minimal standard is job security, and that's what the Family Leave Bill is all about.
Well, let me turn to you, Mary Tavener. You oppose this legislation. I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Congressman Boehner. Isn't it difficult when you see up close a situation like the one facing that family in Georgia?
Well, certainly it is very upsetting to see a young man who is trying to provide for his daughter who is so ill. But this legislation that is being proposed is not going to help him. First of all, it's 3 months unpaid leave. Obviously, by his story, he had to take off 5 months. He had to go work part-time. The legislation would not necessarily help him. Let's also get to the crux of why the business community opposes this legislation. It has nothing to do with the benefit. And we've said before, and we'll say it again, employers want to be sympathetic to their employees. They want to work with them. What we have is a fundamental opposition to mandating employee benefits. We do not think that Congress has the knowledge to determine what kind of benefits employers need to be offering or what kind of benefits employees need to receive. I am a working mother, too, and I've had situations where I needed to be off. I've also had situations where I needed my job, and having a job is a lot more important than having a 12-week unpaid leave.
Ellen Galinsky, you've done a considerable amount of research on this. How do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, we know a great deal about what families need, so the notion of a one-size-fits-all is, I think, not terribly relevant. We know from a bipartisan study that we designed of employers and employees that women need about 12 weeks when they have a baby. And that's what they seem to take over and over and over. We also know that about 1 in 7 employers have the kinds of policies and programs that the bill requires, although many employees are able to negotiate it.
Already 1 in 7, you're saying?
Already 1 in 7 have the kind of policies relating to the parental leave part of the bill. So employees are negotiating this on their own, and so it seems to me that it really is something that we know a great deal about. I think most important, we know from our study that we did, we looked at 4 states that had passed parental leave legislation because so much of this has been rhetoric and assumption and debate around belief as opposed to actual knowledge. And we found in the study that we did that 91% of employers did not think it was a problem at all to implement this legislation.
Well, if that's the case, Congressman Boehner, why is it considered so onerous on your part and the part of others who oppose it?
Well, I think she made the point exactly. The fact is that employers and their employees are best equipped to work this out in their individual circumstances. For the federal government to come in and say to a tomato picker in Texas or to a manufacturer in California or somebody that's working on the docks in New York that you will provide this same benefit, period, we're going to reduce the flexibility that there is between employers and their employees to work out benefits that are mutually agreeable.
But you've already, as I understand the legislation, you've already exempted those firms that have 50 or fewer employees, and I gather that's what, 95% of the employers in the country would then be exempt?
Well, that might be some. If you look at what this bill is going to do and who it's going to protect, about 97% of the employees in this country are either exempted or already have leave policies from their employer. So we're really dealing with 3% of America's employers.
Well, then why is the opposition as strong as it is?
Very simple. What this is a typical example of trying to get the camel's nose under the tent. The proponents of this don't really want 12 weeks of unpaid leave. They want 12 weeks of paid leave. And so this is the first step down the path of the federal government mandating benefits on employers and where employers are going to pay for it.
Congresswoman Rockema, is that right? This is just the one step on the way to getting 12 weeks of paid leave?
Well, that argument is used in any labor legislation and so many pieces of legislation. Let's go back to really what the facts are. And the facts are that this is a minimum labor standard that is desperately needed. There are people all over this country every week, every month, who are losing their jobs when they take time off to care for a family member. That is the fundamental issue. We always establish minimum labor standards to deal not with the compassionate and progressive employer, but those that are not good citizens, and that's what this legislation is all about. Secondly, I think we've got to understand that I have worked long and hard, as has Senator Bond in the Senate, to make this a so-called business-friendly bill. I understand, both as a friend of business and as a Republican, that business needs flexibility to deal with this, that it needs protection against abuse, and I think we've put all of those things into the requirements. The employer can demand a medical opinion, a doctor certification. People are not going to take 12 weeks off unpaid just for specious reasons. The medical requirement, however, is there and the certification is there. We have required that it be permanent employees, employees that work more than a year, are employees in good standing. We have also exempted those that are part-time employees. They have to qualify by working for beyond pension standards.
Well,
there are all kinds of protections for business in this bill.
All right, Mary Tavener, you speak for a segment of the business community. What about that? If all those protections are built in, what is your problem with that?
Well, again, it's a fundamental opposition to mandating employee benefits. Necessity is the mother of invention, and there have been so many wonderful programs that employers have instituted for employees, not just unpaid leave, but paid leave, flexi-time, on-site daycare, not to mention pensions, health insurance, life insurance, tuition assistance. Now Congress is going to come and tell the nation's employers and employees these other things are not as important. What is important is that you provide 12 weeks unpaid leave to all employees. As an employee, I resent Congress telling me what my benefit package should be. As a business person, I would resent Congress telling me what kind of benefit package I should offer to the nation's to my own employees. Secondly, if it's not such a big burden on the nation's employers, why is it that they exempted employers of over 50 workers? Why is that? Unless they acknowledge that this would be a burden on smaller business people.
But if it's just the 3% of the employees, which Congressman Boehner just referred to, and if there have been so many exempted, why is it such a big deal?
Could I speak to the issue of the cost? Because I think that is often stated.
Yes.
Yeah. There is the assumption that it's going to be very costly, and especially for small employers. It's one of the things that we looked at in this a bipartisan study that we did. And companies did not report that it was costly, and small business didn't report that it was more costly than larger business. So to me, rather than mandated business, it comes down to an issue of values. I don't think that, and we've studied the companies that have responded to this issue for many years, at least 15 years I've been studying this. I know that 28%, for example, of large companies do provide a parental leave, but only 4% allow people to take time off for family illness with a specific policy, although many more do it otherwise. Well, so I think that if you do one thing, it doesn't mean that you have to do other things. It also, it's been said that people will cut back their other benefits, and that was not true. In fact, 8% increased their benefits, and 85% didn't have to cut back at all.
Well, if I could just add, yes. I'm sorry. I obviously read Dr. Galinsky's study very carefully, and what I found in the 4 states that she studied, the laws in those states were far less than what is being proposed by Congress. Secondly, a lot of the companies already provided some sort of benefit for their employees, so of course this very extremely minimum standard that a lot of the states have instituted on their own was not at all affected. So and most of the employees didn't even know the benefit or the law existed in the first place. So the study is not really an indication that, yes, we should mandate this thing on the federal level for every employee in the country.
Ellen Galinsky, she's saying your study isn't relevant to this legislation.
I think that it's extremely relevant. One of the states, for example, Rhode Island, had a bill that was had required more than the federal bill did, and the experience of Rhode Island was not different from any of the other free states at all.
Judy, speaking about studies, I think we ought to address the question of cost and benefit packages, because this seems to me to be one of the most specious and weakest arguments that the business community makes. The Government Accounting Office and the Small Business Administration and others have done studies and costed out the estimates of the cost to business for this standard. And it comes to something like $6 and change per year, okay? Now, for $6 and change per year, which is the cost of objective studies, you can't buy another benefit package. But more than that, the studies have clearly indicated that taking a valued employee out of the workforce, retraining and bringing someone new in actually costs more to the business than maintaining the person on an unpaid family leave status.
Well, let me ask
I think all the arguments are in favor of this bill.
All right, Congressman Boehner, both those points that she says objective studies that have been done by the federal government show, in the first place, it's only going to cost businesses about $6 or so per employee
That's
to
hogwash.
implement this.
Hogwash, and Marge knows it. Those studies only looked at the cost of medical care during the time that they were off. They don't include the cost of training, the cost of hiring, and so the costs don't hold up at all. But the other,
cost of training,
I'm sorry,
the cost of the replacement worker. You know, when most companies in America don't have people sitting around waiting for someone to take off. So if somebody's off for medical leave, you've got to bring people in, train them, so you'd lose productivity, and there's cost associated with that. But the most important part that Marge brought up is the fact that employers don't want to lose their workforce. She's exactly right. It costs more to train someone and bring him in than it does to provide this leave to their employees. And that's why employers throughout America are providing this benefit to their employees, because it's to their benefit and to the employees' benefit to work this out together. I was a small employer until I got here in January. I had 6 people in my office. When somebody was out, it was a great disadvantage. But we had a lady out last year for 5 months, paid medical leave, that I had worked out with her. And so employers in America are working this out together with their employees.
Congresswoman Rockema, what about that?
Well, I think the congressman makes my point. The point being that, of course, it's good policy, but we don't establish minimum labor standards for progressive, enlightened employers. We establish them for the vulnerable employees, the employees like the man in Georgia, and for the millions of others that have lost their jobs because of Scrooge-like employers, and they are out there, and that's why we have minimum labor standards in this country.
For Scrooge-like employers.
But Marge, the fact is that the gentleman who was on the tape who lost his job probably isn't covered under this legislation, because it starts off...
Probably not.
You have to have at least 100 employees or more the first 2 years, and then it drops to 50. So he probably wouldn't be covered, even if this bill were to pass tomorrow.
Well, let me make this point,
his first
which is exactly why, I mean, the bill is so minimal and so modest. It has been so cut back in terms of the number of employees that are covered and the conditions under which they are covered. If anything, the criticism should be that it's not comprehensive enough and doesn't cover enough employees. But I believe that this is as far as we can go under the present conditions. I would also say that there is a political component to this, aside from the statistics that we have just been talking about and the intricacies of the bill. I think if we look at the tough times in which American workers are now trying to hold on to their jobs, I, as a Republican, have said far and wide to anyone who would listen to me that this is a good Republican bill. Because what it does is it says that we're taking hard-working, self-reliant, tax-paying Americans who want to take care of their own, and we're helping them take care of their own. That, to me, is family values. That, to me, is self-reliance. That, to me, is what the Republican Party should stand for.
And what about that, Congressman Boehner?
Line up 100 employees and ask them, do you want family and medical leave, or do you want real help and you want your taxes cut? 99 out of 100 will say, cut my taxes. This legislation is talked about in terms of being pro-family legislation. But the fact of the matter is, most people who are covered under this have to work every day. They can't take advantage of this. That's why I call this the Yuppie Empowerment Act of 1991.
What do you mean by that?
The only people who really are going to be able to take advantage of this are people, 2 professional people, both with large incomes. that can afford to take the time off.
I'd like to speak to
Ellen
that.
Galinsky, I want to ask you about that.
Yes, because we looked at that in our research, and what we found was that, in fact, low-income people do take advantage of it. They don't take as long off as upper-income people. They take 9 weeks more instead of 12 weeks or 13 weeks. But what the bill seemed to do in the 4 states was that it seemed to prevent people from taking less than 6 weeks off. There are a number of people, about 1 out of every 5 people, who come back before the medically advised 6 weeks, if you're talking about parental leave, and this bill seems to prevent that.
And why are you saying that's not a good thing? Because what's your point?
No, I'm saying that is a good thing, that the bill really does help families. It does help families be together, and even low-income people take advantage of it. They need the time off. When you have a baby, you don't have a choice about whether you take time off.
Just quickly, Mary Tavener, what about this whole point that the other side has raised, that this is really about values? It's less about mandating benefits on the part of business than it is about family values and bringing families together.
Well, I think that American companies have recognized family values and are doing the best they can to preserve jobs and benefits. And I think if you line up 100 people and you ask them if you want the government intruding in your benefits package, 99 of them will say no. I think that Republicans stand for less government intrusion into our lives, and I think that this is a perfect example of more government intrusion. And it is a mandated benefit, pure and simple. It is not a minimum labor standards. Minimum labor standards are supposed to help everyone. This would not.
Congresswoman Rockema, how do you talked a moment ago about Republicans, and this is a good Republican bill, but in fact the Republican president, President Bush, vetoed a similar piece of legislation last year. How do you feel as a Republican opposing him on this, and what makes you think he's not going to veto this, which he said he's going to do?
Well, I'm never comfortable opposing my own president, but I would like to point to the vote in the Senate that was alluded to at the beginning of this segment. The vote in the Senate shows the way the tide is going, the political tide is going on this bill. It had a veto-proof margin in the Senate. It was proposed by strong conservative Republicans. They have made it more business-friendly, and by their vote, along with more than, I'm sure that we'll have more than 50, maybe more than 60 Republicans this week who will vote for this bill. I think it's showing the president in the present political climate, whether you're talking about job security or whether you're talking about health care, this bill is what the American people want and need.
Congressman Boehner?
Well, I think the president is going to veto it. I think we're going to have the votes to sustain the veto. It's heading the federal government down the path of mandating benefits on employers. At a time when America and the free world wants to encourage free enterprise, we don't need the federal government further strangling the free enterprise system in our country.
Well, that's all we have time for now. We thank you, Congressman Boehner, Congresswoman Rockema, Mary Tavener, and Ellen Galinsky. We thank you all. Jim?
Still to come on the NewsHour tonight, Yeltsin's problems, national park profits, and the art of Chuck Close. It is not easy these days being the president of the Republic of Russia. Boris Yeltsin is a man in the middle of escalating economic and political chaos. Today's fight concerned a breakaway region in southern Russia. We have an update from Moscow by Gabby Rado of Independent Television News.
The Chechen horsemen in front of the Russian Parliament building today were bringing the complex ethnic turmoil of the Caucasus quite literally to Boris Yeltsin's doorstep. They were among a crowd protesting at the Russian president's decree imposing a state of emergency in the breakaway Muslim region of Chechen Ingushetia. The Parliament has been in extraordinary session since yesterday. Some deputies arguing that Yeltsin has the right to impose order on the multi-ethnic Russian Federation, others pointing out that the decree smacked of the authoritarianism of the communist past. The final vote was an emphatic defeat for the absent Yeltsin in his first confrontation with nationalist strife inside the Federation. Just as Mikhail Gorbachev saw his union splintering before the August coup,
Yeltsin's now finding his Russia infirmant, his own parliament cancelling his decree. Some said he'd acted on bad advice.
Думаю, что и все сегодня это поняли. Главная вина здесь не просто Ельцина, а тех людей, которым доверился, которые подготовили указ, не учитывающий всех факторов этнических, политических, религиозных и тому подобное.
The reversal of Yeltsin's decree was greeted with delight by the crowd outside. Among them were Chechen deputies to the Russian parliament who've been acting as mediators.
Я думаю, что Ельцин нас послушается, потому что есть еще выход из этой ситуации. Это то, что сегодня Верховный Совет России отменил указ президента, приостановил его действие, принял, значит, решение о создании комиссии по связи, значит, с общественным движением Чечен-Ингушетии и пошел на какое-то мирное решение этого вопроса.
Stalin is now blamed for much of the recent ethnic troubles in the Caucasus. A Georgian himself, he drew up borders designed to divide and rule the turbulent people of the region. The present crisis in the Chechen-Ingush Autonomous Republic came to a head this last weekend, with nationalists reacting angrily to Boris Yeltsin's decree. The leadership issued a general mobilization to all men aged between 15 and 55, while road and rail links to the Russian Federation were cut. At the height of the anti-Yeltsin demonstrations, calls were made for a holy war against Russia to be waged by the various Muslim nations living in the Caucasus region. The nationalist leader, Dzhokhar Dudayev, was sworn in as president. Moscow declared his election invalid and ordered his arrest to no effect. 650 Russian troops were sent into the area, but yesterday they were bussed out again without taking any action.
Я убежден и при полном убеждении. Кавказ должен быть независимым, свободным, единым, самим Всевышним, земной рай. Самый благодатный край на земном шаре превращен в мусорный ящик.
Some of the barricades which surrounded the Russian White House in the August coup have been left in place as a memorial. Now the current crisis over Chechen-Ingushetia will show whether the democracy which had then triumphed will be put into practice in every corner of the Russian Federation. Dissidents turned deputies like Father Gleb Yakunin see today's events as a test case for democracy.
Чечено-ингушский сейчас регион является тем оселком, на котором мы как раз проверим вот эту самую доктрину. Я думаю, что до этого дела не дойдет. И во многом зависит от мастерства нашего руководства, президента и его команды. Если мы сумеем...
Yeltsin received a humiliation today, and he'll have to learn to respect ethnic groups inside his own republic if the Russian Federation is not to disintegrate and go the way of the Soviet Union.
This year marks the 75th anniversary of the National Park Service, which is in danger of becoming a victim of its own success. As another record-breaking tourist season draws to an end, correspondent Kwame Holman looks at the cost of using the national parks. The issue is, who should pay for maintaining these national treasures?
When the National Park Service was created 75 years ago, just getting to the parks was an adventure. Visitors spent days making the journey into the interiors of what was then the exotic West. Now, interstates and jet planes make national parks like Yosemite in Northern California easy to reach. Last year, the nation's parks hosted 260 million visitors, triple the number in 1960. The National Park Service says attendance will double again in the next 20 years at the 358 areas under its domain. The extra use has taken a toll, helping run up a $2 billion backlog in park rehabilitation and repair. The new areas added to the system each year are a further strain.
Good morning. $5 fee.
Even the entry fees don't help. The money collected here goes straight to the U.S. Treasury. So do the fees commercial businesses pay for the privilege of providing recreational services and selling goods in the parks. But now there's a new focus on getting those concessioners to pay more and on using that money to improve the park. Manuel Lujan is Secretary of the Interior, the agency that oversees the National Park Service.
I want more money going back into the park instead of profits to the concessionaires.
Lujan is changing dramatically the relationship between the concessioners and the Park Service that dates back to the very first national parks. In the 1920s, the government had to offer economic incentives to lure businesses into locating in remote national parks. But today, the park's increasing popularity has turned those concessions into big business, generating more than $500 million in revenues a year. In August, Secretary Lujan proposed controversial new regulations for the 600 national park concessioners.
I want to instill some competition into who operates these national parks. The present contracts give a lock to the ones that have the contract forever and ever. Now, I might say this very clearly, that I don't want the National Park Service. I don't want the government operating the concessions. I still want those concessionaires. I want them to make a profit. But I want some competition instilled in it. Competition makes for better management. And I want more money going back into the park instead of profits for the concessionaires.
That kind of talk concerns operators like George Campson. For 29 years, Campson and his family have run the tour boats to Fort Sumter National Park from Charleston, South Carolina. He sees the Secretary's plans as a shot across the bow.
When the Confederates fired on Fort Sumter out here in Charleston Harbor, they really didn't believe and they didn't desire to start a 4-year civil war. It would be a terrible thing in American history. They only intended to run the Yankees off of Fort Sumter, and they thought they would do it in one afternoon, it would all be over. But you see, oftentimes, people start something, they don't know where it's going to end. But I believe that if this starts, it'll end by concessionaires like myself and all others going out of business. And who will fill our place? With federal employees and the federal government.
Lujan started focusing on concessions policy when he took office in 1989. He declared a moratorium on the renewal of all contracts as they expired and began subjecting new contracts to greater scrutiny. Then he asked the Park Service for proposals to improve the concessions program. A task force made several recommendations, the first of which Lujan had already begun implementing on his own. The franchise fee, or percentage of their gross receipts concessioners pay the government, should be raised. Paul Pritchard, president of the nonprofit National Parks and Conservation Association, agrees.
Realize we're talking about 500 total, roughly, concessionaires, and their total gross receipts were somewhere in the neighborhood of $500 million last year. The total amount of money paid to the federal treasury for this relationship, special relationship they have with the parks, was a little over $12.5 million, not even enough to pay for the management of that service.
On average, concessioners pay only 2.5% of their revenues to the Park Service. That's in marked contrast to the percentage paid by concessioners outside of the national parks, who sometimes pay as much as 45%, according to Secretary Lujan. Lujan decided 22% was a fair figure for park concessions. Not everyone agrees.
All right, what can I show you?
This store at Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado is operated by Rex Maughan, who heads the group that represents concessioners. Maughan says the 22.5% franchise fee proposed by Secretary Lujan would cripple smaller mom-and-pop concessioners. Small concessioners hold 9 out of 10 of the contracts in the national parks, but generate only 20% of the revenues.
If the secretary comes in and says you got to pay 22.5% franchise fees, 17-18% of the gross of the total sales in the operation are going to have to be borrowed in order to pay the franchise fee. Nobody could do it. If they did it 1 year, they would go out of business. So it's not a very good program.
Now, it could break some of them. And in that case, we wouldn't go for the 22%. We try to set it at whatever gives that concessionaire a reasonable profit and an income to the federal government.
While it's true that most concessionaires are mom-and-pop operators, big companies, which hold 10% of the contract, collect 80% of the dollars spent in the park. At Yosemite, the annual gross is the highest in the park system, an estimated $80 million. But under a 28-year-old contract, the concessionaire pays the government one of the lowest franchise fees, less than 1% of the gross. Its profit reportedly is $13 million a year. Lujan's new regulations incorporate another task force recommendation, elimination of a concessionaire's right to keep a contract by matching a competitor's bid. Rex Maughan says that right protects businesses that are doing a good job and ensures continuity at a concession.
There's many reasons that was given, and it's not a guarantee. It means that if the concessionaire does a good job, he gets satisfactory ratings from the Park Service each year, that he will be given a preference to renew his contract. And if you're going to invest a lot of dollars of your own private money, you certainly, I think anyone would like to have a little bit of security that he's going to be able to renew the contract when it comes up.
I read that in the last 29 concessions that were up for renewal, there was no competing bid for 28.
Donald Green is executive director of the Yosemite Restoration Trust.
Well, as long as they have that kind of interpretation of the law, no one's going to bother bidding. Because if you bid, and it's a good bid, the other fellow can match you. So that's why there's been no bidding in the past. And the Secretary wants to change that, and I applaud him for that.
Green's group and several others are expected to bid on the Yosemite contract when it expires in 1993, creating the first real competition for a major concession. But even if existing concessionaires lose their right to match a competing bid, there's another provision that traditionally has scared off competitors. It's the requirement that a new concessionaire pay for buildings and other facilities constructed by the old concessionaire. Secretary Lujan wants to buy them over a period of time.
If we own the building, we can dictate who's going to be the concessionaire. If they own the buildings, then we are really stuck with the same one being there all the time.
A third task force recommendation supported by Lujan is to shorten the terms of concession contracts. 30-year contracts have been common, but Secretary Lujan wants contracts to end or undergo review every 5 years. George Campson says he wouldn't have invested $1.5 million in a new boat, the Spirit of Charleston, without the security of his 15-year concession contract.
We make payments, regularly. And we couldn't do that if we had a 5-year contract. We just couldn't do that. And the people who want to visit Fort Sumter National Monument would not have the benefit of this excellent vessel that we have that provides that service. Or any vessel, because you can't borrow money on that on a 5-year contract. You can't hire competent people to work for you if they knew you were going to be out of business in 5 years. They can pass all the bills they want to, but they're not going to change the basic rules which govern business operations.
No matter who wins these arguments, Lujan or the concessionaires, the parks won't be helped much unless the system for allocating money changes too. Under current rules, almost all the fees the Park Service collects must go straight to the U.S. Treasury. Lujan wants to earmark money for park improvement before it gets to Washington, before it even leaves each park. For example, the higher franchise fees.
The idea that I'm using is that instead of them paying us the 22%, that they pay us a small amount, maybe 5%, that goes into the general treasury, because we do owe, we have to put some money in the general treasury. But the other 17%, we'll say, we apply it either to buying them out, maybe we need a new building there, and we have the concessionaire build it, and we give him credit for it.
Secretary Lujan's new regulations could take effect in November, following a period of public comment. But Congress is considering 3 bills that would make the Secretary's changes national law rather than just his personal policy. If such legislation passes, concessionaires fear a future Interior Secretary would be prevented from ever returning to the old system.
Finally tonight, we have an essay. New York Newsday art critic M.I. Wallach paints her own portrait of a famous portrait painter.
How do you paint a face that's as big as a movie screen and so seemingly realistic it challenges the meaning of a photograph? That's one of the problems Chuck Close set himself in the paintings that have won him an international following over the past quarter century. But then, Chuck Close always has been good at problem solving. So he composed his portraits piece by piece from the smallest component parts, each in itself a tiny abstract painting.
I've always broken the image down into smaller bite-sized pieces, incremental units that allow me to make decisions. I'm overwhelmed by the largeness of the project. How am I going to make a nose? Oh my God, look at this big thing. How can I make any decisions?
The attitude he brought to constructing his paintings piece by piece was the way in which he had to reconstruct his life after the enormity of what happened here at the mayor's mansion on December 7th, 1988. That day he'd walked as he loved to walk, the 5 miles from his studio in Soho to present an award here. Suddenly he felt pain so terrible he had to be rushed to the hospital. An occluded spinal artery had collapsed, shutting off the blood flow to thousands of nerves.
And so virtually everything from my shoulders down is compromised to one degree or another. Some muscles more than others. Some are totally knocked out. Some are partially knocked out. And I spent 7 months in a rehabilitation hospital.